So let's go ahead and get started, Christina, if that's okay with you. So
Mhm.
before we move into the sort of focus on motivating students with feedback and talking more specifically about that, we wanted to do a couple of setup activities. So the first thing is, I know from looking at the roster that folks in this space are coming from a lot of different kinds of contexts. Those of you who've been teaching about inequality for some time, and those who may be new to thinking about questions of inequality in the classroom. And so if you've been following kind of social media or the news, there's been a call specifically focused on today, June 10th, related to the inequalities that have become very visible, although longstanding, particularly around the killing of George Floyd and the protests that have resulted from that. So what we wanted to do is share some resources with you all before we get started. So there's some resources and some links. One side note I'll say is basically, as the person who put this slide together, in a way, there's way too much text on this slide. Don't be like me, but it was one quick way to get you some resources. So if you're curious about what's going on today, there's a link here showing sort of why today, sort of what that call is all about. A link to some resources for learning and reflection, particularly about planning opportunities in higher ed, and specifically about the experiences of Black folks in higher ed. So some more reading, some more resources there. A really helpful set of specific practices to implement in your classes when thinking about how to challenge inequality and try to achieve a little greater justice. And then some ways that you might think about feedback and motivation for your students. So one question to always be asking ourselves is, who are the students we're keeping in mind as we're planning our courses? How can we learn about them? How can we read about their experiences and understand them, and then make choices based on this knowledge that we have? So we are not doing enough in this very brief intro, but wanted to mention that this is a moment where these conversations are happening. These are some resources to get you started, specifically related to some action steps you could take. And there's one other bullet, I think, in there too. So if you have other resources to share, please feel free to add them to the chat. So we welcome the expertise and knowledge of folks in this space too. So let me pause there for a second. Anything verbally anyone wants to add? I always like to give it a good few seconds before moving on. We'll do one other quick anonymous check-in activity too. Okay. Where can I access the slide? So Christina, would you mind popping the Z link, or James, the Z link into the chat where folks can access the slides? That would be great.
Unfortunately, I don't have access to the chat for some reason.
Oh, I
On my
gotcha.
setup. I'm sorry about that.
No big deal. No big deal.
And I'm not sure
Here we
why I
go.
don't have access to the chat.
It's okay. No worries. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Good deal. So let's do one other. So Christina, if you would move on in the slide when you have a second. Thank you. So we just want to do one quick check-in by way of a poll. So I'm going to make this available to you in a second, but the question that we're asking you all to respond to, and this is anonymous, so we're not tracking how folks have responded, given our local and national and global context in our current moment, how prepared do you feel to plan for the fall? So let me go ahead and get the poll going. So let me give maybe 20, 30 seconds or so for folks to read these responses and vote. Hopefully you can see the poll. In full disclosure, we have no idea how y'all are going to respond to this. So this will be informative for us, I think, too, moving forward.
Hi, Claire. I don't mean to interrupt here, but
Yeah.
we don't have access to the slides, so you're gonna have to change the share settings.
Okay. When we shift over to you, Christina, I'll go in and do a little troubleshooting with that. Thank you, James. Okay, so I'm going to close it down and share the results with you all. So this is what you all have said. Okay. So it looks like most people, around 60%, say somewhat prepared. About a third say not very prepared. A few folks feel help. A few folks, one person says, I feel pretty prepared. So a few questions. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So hopefully that will guide our conversation. I think if we had a lot more time, we could do some more probing around why folks have said what they've said, but just to give us all a context of where folks are at in this moment. All right. Thanks. So Christina.
So with that as our background, I'm going to move into the presentation itself and begin with our goals for the session. So we'd like to start out briefly talking about considering what motivates students in an online course. And then we'll connect that with how feedback can play a role in that motivation. But the majority of the time that we'll spend in this discussion together will be to explore some strategies and tools that will help you provide students feedback, so give students feedback, and get feedback from your students. And specifically in getting student feedback from your students, it will be feedback on their learning and on your teaching. So let's begin by talking about what motivates students in an online course. So there's been actually quite a bit of research on this topic and looking at different factors that motivate students in online courses. And we've just sort of summarized that research along with some ideas from people who have taught online effectively. A number one thing that often stands out when talking to students themselves and also looking at performance is this idea of instructor and student presence. And that simply means how often do the students hear from the instructor, see that the instructor is there, checking in, responding to discussion forums, posting things, and student presence is how often do they hear from their fellow students, their classmates? Are they just sort of taking this course on their own, or are they able to interact and see what other students are doing? Increased presence helps increase student motivation. Activity and engagement are also things that help motivate students in online courses. Activity meaning it's not just a passive providing of information to students through videos, recorded videos, or even synchronous lectures or readings or content. It's that students are actually doing something. They're engaged with the material. They may be engaged with each other. Another thing that helps with student motivation is that the material that you're talking about is relevant to students' lives. And I think this is a possibility regardless of the topic of your course or the discipline. It sometimes just takes a bit of creativity to see how, for instance, math can be relevant to students' lives. And there are lots of ways that instructors have used their discipline to connect it to something in the news or something that students are interested in at the time. Another is belongingness and community. And this is the idea that students feel like, I belong in this class, people expect me to succeed, and I am an active member of this learning community. And I feel like I am in community with my instructor and with my fellow classmates. And the last thing I would like to mention is this idea of the sense that they can be successful, or self-efficacy, or the expectancy of doing well. And this expectancy is sometimes tied to some theories about expectancy value theories for motivation that broadly state motivation is related to how students value the material in the course and their expectancy for success. So you could imagine that students could really value your material, find it extremely interesting, but if they feel like, I can't do this, this is too difficult for me, or I'm somehow being excluded, I don't feel like I belong to this group, that can reduce their motivation. So This list is by no means exhaustive for all the types of things that can help motivate students in an online environment, but it's a fairly good summary of the kinds of things that research has told us and students have told us about what motivates them and keeps them engaged in an online course. And I just also want to add that persistence in an online course is a continual concern. For those of you who haven't taught online before, students need to be a little more self-disciplined and motivated in order to persist in a course. So I would say, even though these ideas would apply to a face-to-face course, they're just as, if not more important, in online. So what does that have to do with feedback? Oh, Kate, Claire, do you have?
I just want to add one other quick thing. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, please do.
Just to add one other thing, that often when we think about motivation, or when folks are talking about motivation, they're talking about it as though it's an individual thing that comes from students. But what we're really trying to say here and frame for you is that so much of motivation has to do with the structure of your course and the way that you've set up your course. So this gets back to the technology conversation that was happening as we were kind of starting out today. So are you explaining to your students how the technology works in your course? So are you setting up your course in such a way in all of these these areas that Christine is highlighting, such that the structure of your course supports students' ability to be motivated? So we'll talk more about that in a bit, but I just wanted to add like another layer of framing, not just because my disciplinary background is sociology and I'm always thinking about structures, but it's another way to think about it, how we're setting up our course as something that's going to be motivating to students.
And that's such a great point, and I'm glad you made that clear, because part of setting up the structure for your course is deciding ahead of time what types of feedback will you be offering, for what, and when, and for whom. And so I think what we're really trying to encourage today is that you start thinking about feedback opportunities well before your course starts. So what you see here is the same list that you saw before. And basically what I'd like to say to you is that feedback can play a role in every single one of these. The types of feedback that you provide to your students are part of that instructor and student presence. It is part of engagement in a course, providing feedback. Feedback can show how the material is relevant to their lives. If something new comes up in the news or elsewhere that you can connect. And of course, feedback can play a huge role in belongingness and community and a sense that students can be successful. So feedback is really the tool that you have to continually leverage to help support these things that we know help motivate students. So I'm going to turn it over to Claire now.
Yep. So we're going to shift the discussion a little bit to doing a little bit of brainstorming with you all. And we're going to do this in a Google Doc. So I'm just going to take a minute or two, give folks some time to navigate over to our collective Google Doc. So I'm going to put the link over in the chat. So take a second and go there. So Christina, if you wouldn't mind clicking on that link, and we can show you what this Google Doc looks like. So a couple of things I want to note, just to give you a little bit of a tech orientation before we actually ask you to do the work. So if you'll notice up at the top of this Google Doc, we've set this up in a way to be as accessible as possible. And we've done that in a couple of ways. So if you're doing something like this in a class, in a synchronous class, or even in something asynchronous, so you'll notice up at the top of the document, there are 3 linked bookmarks, and I'll explain kind of the structure of what we're asking you to think about in a second. And then I also have set this up so that each of these sections that we're going to ask you to brainstorm about are associated with different kind of levels. So Christina, if you would go over to edit, or to so much easier when I'm driving,
Yeah.
go over to edit, and then let's see, sorry, to view, over to, okay, so document outline is shown. If you would click on the little document outline button, you'll be able to see, oops, nope, undo that.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. There we go. So over there on the left, you can see kind of the headings too. So this is another way to navigate within this document. So just a quick orientation to this document. So what we're asking you to brainstorm about within this document is try to think of ways that you give feedback to your students, ways that students give feedback to each other in your courses, and then ways that students are giving you feedback on their learning and on your teaching. So we're asking you to just do a little bit of brainstorming. So feel free to jump right in. We'll give you a few minutes to do this. So just try to brainstorm some examples. As folks are filling them in, you'll see some examples. Try to brainstorm some examples of ways that you are giving feedback to your students, ways that students are giving feedback to each other, and then ways that students are giving feedback to you. Great, so I see folks are already jumping in. So maybe let's give folks, Christina, what do you think? Maybe 3 minutes or so?
3 minutes sounds good.
Okay, we'll be quiet for a few minutes, let you type a few things in, and we'll come back together. And I can monitor the time. So maybe just another minute or so to wrap up comments. Okay, so just noticing over in the chat, Sarah, yes, having everyone type at the same time is indeed challenging. So there are benefits and drawbacks to a lot of the tools we use. And one of the challenges with using a collective Google Doc like this is that, you know, if you have multiple people in, it can be kind of hard to keep track of who's on what line. So that definitely is a challenge of this tool. That said, if anyone has solutions to that, please let us know, because there are benefits too. So the Google Doc within a table, maybe. Yeah, maybe. And then typing within that table can have similar issues. But anyway, so we can think about the technology. Maybe works better asynchronously. Yeah, could be. Okay, so let's come back. So part of the reason we're asking you to do this is to get a read of what kinds of things you all are already doing. And we're going to be touching on kind of each of these categories of instructor-student feedback, student-student feedback, and then student-instructor feedback kind of as we go along too. So feel free to keep finishing your thoughts or keep brainstorming or reading the ideas that folks have. So let's come back to Christina, if you don't mind, the PowerPoint slides.
All right. Sorry,
That's okay. No worries.
Trouble.
This is the challenge of multiple windows.
Yeah.
I can give it a shot too if that's easier. I don't
mind.
Yeah,
I'm having trouble finding it now.
All good. No worries.
Sorry about that.
Okay. We got this. So as we were saying, this is just one kind of framing to think about the kinds of feedback that you're giving. So thinking about your own planning too. So if you find that you didn't have much to say in one of those categories, you could think a little bit about developing that a bit more, and we'll give you some ideas and some strategies for how to do that as we move forward. So let's move on. So some other dimensions to think about. So Christina, I think we're over to you for this one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have all added your ideas and ways that you share feedback. And of course, I've noticed that this falls into some different categories in terms of the forms of feedback. And we have organized forms of feedback into 3 major categories that are actually sort of continuums within each category that we'd like you to consider as types of feedback or forms of feedback that you might provide for your students. So first off, there are formative and summative types of feedback. And formative would mean that the feedback is designed to give students information about their progress in order for them to improve or learn from it. Whereas summative feedback would be more feedback directed at evaluating or information on a final product. So thinking about final exam feedback or final paper feedback where students don't have the opportunity to make any changes, that would be summative feedback. Whereas other forms of feedback that students would be able to have time and opportunities to respond to would be more formative feedback.
Christina, we have a, sorry to interrupt, but I see a question. I see someone has their hand raised.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I can't see a PowerPoint. If there's a PowerPoint right now, the only screen I'm still seeing is the brainstorming sheet. Is everyone else seeing the PowerPoint?
Are other folks able to see the PowerPoint? Yeah.
Everyone else can see it. So if it's possible to just quickly set me straight.
James, would you mind jumping in here for a second?
You just need to go back to Zoom.
Yeah, click on Zoom on the bottom.
You got to make sure, yes, you got to make sure that you have Zoom application open. You might be still looking at your browser.
I'm back. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Okay,
James.
sorry, Christina.
That's fine. And by the way, this is James Andre is joining us for our webinar. James will be available for answering chat questions you might have about technical tools and for general technical help that you saw. He just jumped in and helped us there. So wanted to make sure he was introduced.
Thank you, James. You're the best.
He's the best. All right, formative and summative feedback. The next category would be instructor versus peer feedback. So we often think about providing feedback to our students from the instructor, but you can also set up opportunities for students to provide feedback to each other. And this would help with those motivation strategies that we talked about before, where students feel like they're a sense of community and they see that other students are present and active in the course. So that's another type of feedback that you might want to consider. For peer feedback, it's always a good idea to provide students with some type of guidelines or rubrics or suggestions for how to provide that feedback to their peers. And finally, the idea of global versus individual feedback. Individual feedback would be where you as the instructor, or students could do this as well, would provide one-on-one feedback to a particular student on an assignment or a discussion post, whatever. And if you have many students in your class, this can be labor intensive. It can take you a lot of time to provide individual feedback to students. So another tool to think about using is this idea of global feedback, where you provide overall feedback to all of the students based on a general summary of the types of things that you're seeing. So for instance, if you are looking at posts on a discussion forum, you might periodically jump in with some global feedback that could provide that presence, instructor presence in your course without you having to respond to every single student's individual post. So think about what are the things that are essential for you to provide individual feedback about, but then consider, are there things that I could provide global feedback that would give students the feedback they need in order to move forward? Is global feedback that motivating is a question that I saw. And I think it's an excellent question, because I was sitting in on a course with one of my colleagues, and she had us working on an activity together. And at the end of the activity, we got, the answer right. And she provided us with some really quick global feedback. And basically what she said was, you all know how to do this now. You have mastered this skill. And it was such a simple thing to say, but it was really powerful for me because, one, okay, I now know that I'm able to master this skill. Two, it built up my feeling of self-efficacy. And three, it showed me that my instructor really cared about me. So I am a fan of global feedback in terms of even just simple statements that let students know they're on track and they are meeting your outcomes. So going on to the next slide, there are also multiple different elements you can consider for how you provide that feedback to students. So obviously, giving feedback on papers or giving feedbacks on assignments, assessments is sort of an obvious way that we think about providing feedback. But consider providing feedback on different areas. For instance, discussion posts. Again, the feedback doesn't necessarily have to be on every single student post. It could be more global, or you could summarize the kinds of things that you're seeing in discussion posts. It could be feedback on an individual discussion post if you feel like a student has made a really excellent point and you'd like them to discuss that further. You can also provide students with feedback on their level of participation. So do you have a student who maybe is disappearing from your class, or you haven't seen them participate? One way to provide them feedback is a quick email to say, I've noticed you haven't been engaged or participating. Is there anything going on that I need to know about? Or conversely, you could thank a student who was sharing good material and providing interaction with their colleagues. Another thing you can provide feedback on are questions, the types of questions that students are asking of you. Again, it could be positive feedback that these are excellent questions and I really want you to keep these coming. It could be more guiding feedback in the sense that I'm noticing that your questions right now are pretty basic, and so I'm wondering if maybe you need more time or information on covering some of the basics before we can get to discussions. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list of the types of elements to consider for providing feedback. This is just sort of some ideas to get you thinking about various areas that you could provide feedback on. And so Claire, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Perfect timing. I was just about to jump in with one other thought. So thinking about participation specifically with online courses. So I'm thinking about participation really broadly here. Some of what the longstanding research about online teaching has shown is that reaching out to students early in online classes, early and often, is really critical to that retention piece that we were talking about. So if you see in the first week or couple weeks, depending on the timing of your course, that some students aren't even logging into Canvas or aren't engaging in the activities that you've set up, sending out a personal email to them just to check in, hey, is everything okay? You having trouble accessing materials? What's going on? That early check-in really sets the tone for the course as a whole and helps students connect with your course. So one component of feedback to consider here, what the research suggests is that reaching out to students and sending couple emails, checking in early in the class is really important. So thinking about budgeting yourself a little bit of time to do that early on in the course, knowing that there'll probably be some students that need a reach out early on. So just want to add that in.
Great point.
Okay, ready to move on?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so I think we're over to me. So we just wanted to do a quick little, here are some suggestions for some tools you might think of. And as with any suggestions for tools, it really depends on kind of what you're comfortable with, what you've used before. Maybe some of these are new, maybe some of these are not. Always to try to keep the tools, make sure you're giving students enough time to get used to these tools and be familiar with them. But just to give you a list of a few to think about. So ways for you to give feedback to your students, obviously things like grades, right? So using SpeedGrader within Canvas to convey grades, using rubrics. One thing I'll add here from the research from some focus groups that have been done with students at the U is getting that quick feedback related to grading is really useful for students, especially given that they can use a what if grading projection tool within Canvas. So if you don't know about this, happy to share some more resources about that, but there's a tool that students can use to say, what if I get a 60 on my final exam? How is that going to affect my final grade? But of course, they can't use that tool if we're not keeping grades updated. Not that any of us have challenges with that, but just want to throw that in there as something to kind of keep in mind. So obviously using the Canvas tools for conveying information about grades, giving some audio feedback. You can do that within SpeedGrader, within Canvas in a few different ways. So if you are spending a long time typing out feedback, maybe you can give some quick audio feedback that might be more efficient for you. And then again, coming back to these global feedback ideas, so on discussion boards, or if folks have turned in an assignment and you want to give a quick summary of how folks did on that assignment, giving folks feedback about quizzes or homework debriefs. You could do that in a synchronous Zoom session. You could do that in a Canvas announcement. So these are kind of another brainstorm of ways to give some global feedback to students. So think about what's going to work for your course. So that's one. And I also can't see the chat now, so if there are questions that come in, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. And then student peer feedback. So a couple of things you may not be aware of that exist. So there's a peer review function within Canvas. So you can set up groups, you can set up peer review within Canvas. So there's a link here specifically to that peer review function and how to set that up. Full disclosure, that is not my area of expertise. So if you have real specific questions about that, we can direct you to some resources there. But just an FYI, it exists. Flipgrid, if folks have seen or used that in classes, students can give each other feedback with little videos. There are ways that they can personalize them or even, have characters that represent them instead. So a lot of flexibility there for students to give each other some quick video feedback. And then a couple of annotation tools that folks may or may not have used before. So this is these are tools that allow for collective annotating of PDFs, for example. So Hypothesis and Perusall are two that exist that I think are supported by the U. So James, if you know otherwise, definitely jump in and say, but there are other annotations.
Perusall is, but Hypothesis isn't, sorry.
Oh no, so Hypothesis isn't, okay. Thank you. So if there are others that folks use, those are possibilities too, but these are the two that I've seen mentioned most frequently. So any other feedback tools that anyone else wants to throw in? You can say out loud too, you don't have to just put it in the chat. Any others that you all use? I'm thinking back to kind of the document that you all were putting together as well.
Catherine Kirkpatrick added VoiceThread.
Yep, VoiceThread. Folks can use that to add audio to PowerPoints, for example. Any others?
You consider polls that are substantive related to the class, the kind of feedback where students get to see what other students' views or ideas or answers to a question are?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, vigorous head nods from me. Yes, thank you for that. Yep, polls, so like we did at the start of this session, so folks can see collective agreement or disagreement or, responses to questions, whether folks are on track. Yep. Other tools that you all have used? Telepathy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Joking.
And, one thing I want to add to this, and Claire mentioned it early in this slide, is the idea of getting feedback to students in a timely manner. If you can get feedback on assignments or things like within a week or 10 days, it provides students the information they need to make adjustments going forward. One of the big complaints that I hear from students is that they don't receive feedback on assignments until it's too late for them to do anything about it. And it's to build that feedback time into your calendar, like marking it off, or here's when I'm going to provide feedback.
Yep, blocking it off. Okay, thanks.
So we have a question here from Sarah. What about an assignment where we ask them to reflect on their own performance? Does self-reflection count as an instructor-student feedback if we ask them to do it and grade on it?
Sure, I think it could. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think student self-reflection is a way to encourage metacognition, a way for them to be encouraged to think about how they study, how they're thinking about their performance, and see it more as part of their commitment and contract in the course as an active learner and participant.
And it's also, as we'll say in a second, it's a way for students to give you feedback about their learning and how it's going. So we'll talk more about that in a second too.
And just to address the grading part, I am a fan of always providing points of some kind for assignments that you think are important. And so it may not be that you grade it with a grade for how well they did it, but more of providing points for them actually having done it, or plus or minus, those kinds of things. But actually assigning points to these kinds of things demonstrates to students that these assignments are important to you.
Yeah, so just to say it a slightly different way, grades are a communication tool. Sometimes grades get a bad rap that, well, students are only doing something for the grade. Well, if you're juggling 4 or 5 courses and trying to figure out what to prioritize, yeah, students are doing things for grades. Grades are a communication tool. So I find it helpful to think of them that way rather than something punitive. So that gets back to what Christina is suggesting too. Grades, points, small points, just to kind of confirm that folks have done something or tried it. And that can help be that communication tool of, hey, this is a really important concept that I want you to get.
Yeah.
So let me move on here. So you could think a little bit about, we're not going to talk about this right now, but you could think for yourself about which kinds of tools you're using that would be most useful for sharing some formative feedback versus summative feedback. What's kind of the array of tools you're using for those things? And maybe it's just 1 or 2, and that's fine too. So let me move on a bit. So go ahead.
So this is mine. Is it okay to move forward with this? Okay. So the last thing that we'd like to talk about today is getting feedback from your students, receiving feedback. And specifically, we're going to talk about receiving feedback from students on your teaching. And this is one of the things that I believe we're talking about formative feedback on student learning at this point, not feedback on teaching. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, yes. Yep. So when this kind of third area of get students, hearing some feedback from students about both their learning and our teaching, which are slightly different things. So we're going to talk about getting feedback from your students on their learning first, and then feedback on our teaching after that.
Thank you for the clarification, Claire.
That's some named Claire, so
The clarification.
We're here all day, folks. Just kidding. So, so thinking about kind of feedback on student learning. So as folks were noting, I was seeing this kind of in the Google Doc that we were collectively working on. Some folks are already implementing these strategies. So these strategies are called classroom assessment techniques. Typically it refers to something that is just kind of a quick check-in to see how students are understanding something in your class. And there are lists and lists, pages and pages of examples of CATs, classroom assessment techniques that you can use in your class. Everything from doing a quick, what folks call a minute paper, or a muddiest point, what's the most confusing thing that we've discussed today so far. You can ask students to paraphrase something that you've said to them, put something in their own words. You can ask them to generate a test question, either an open answer or multiple choice test question. You can have students apply a concept. There are different ways to structure responses. So three takeaways that you have, 2 questions that you still have, and 1 point that you want other students to understand or something. There are different ways to kind of break down strategies that you can use to assess how students are doing. And you can do a lot of these in both asynchronous and synchronous online teaching too. So you can ask folks to say what the muddiest point from that session was in a chat, for example, in a synchronous session. You can ask students to do some paraphrasing in a discussion board. There are lots of ways that these strategies can be used so that you can get some feedback on whether students understand what you're talking about or whether they're meeting your aims for the course. So that's one set of strategies. And again, I saw in the sheet that some folks are already doing things like this already. So other kinds of things you could do, again, just to give you some more ideas if you haven't considered these. So you can set up some practice quizzes within Canvas with some feedback that students get immediately when they take the quiz. You can include feedback, as we heard a little bit ago. You can ask folks to do some peer reviewed or provide multiple drafts of work. You can include feedback as part of that assignment. And then some reflective writing. So whether it's embedded within assignment or something separate, having folks write some reading reflections. This could again be in an online format pretty easily, maybe working on some collective notes with each other, doing a learning journal so that you are checking and hearing from students about, are they getting kind of the key points that you want them to get, and then can make some tweaks along the way. Just a few more ideas.
And
So
I'd just like to jump in from,
please.
there was a comment from Kelsey on the chat about, she's a big fan of reflection assignments. She does exam wrappers and subsequent corrections and reflections in all of her courses.
One thing I would add here too, that in my experience, especially if I'm piloting something new, I pretty much always, so if I'm piloting a new assignment, I pretty much always include a little reflection component where I ask students to tell me about how it went for them. So I can get a sense about whether they're meeting the aims that I've set up for that assignment, or that, writing assignment, or that short paper, whatever it is. So these can be especially useful as you're piloting something new to get a little bit of feedback about whether it's doing the thing that you want it to do. And then in the longer term too, that can be helpful for tracking that.
Yeah. Catherine also has a comment. She asks her students to look back at an earlier assignment and reflect on how their work has gone since they submitted it, which is sort of along the lines of what you were talking about, Claire, and that she finds that it's helpful for them.
Yep. Sometimes I'll have students write letters to future students too about what they should have known or understood about the course. That can be a thing you can do, which students usually are pretty invested in. And I like to read those at the start of the next class too, so folks can hear from previous students. Yeah, lots of ideas here. Great. Any others anyone wants to throw in here? Okay. Awesome. So the last kind of component here that we want to walk through with you is thinking about how you get feedback from your students on your teaching, which overlaps a bit with the previous point, but not entirely. It's a little different.
Yeah. So if I could only offer one piece of advice to teachers, instructors of all kind, it would be this: collect early term feedback from your students. That would be my #1 piece of advice. And we'll just quickly go through some components of that that I think are important to keep in mind. So next point is to ensure that the questions that you ask students when you collect this early term feedback focuses on their learning, rather than more open-ended, what do you like about this course, what don't you like, because you don't want them commenting on like the messy background, your hair, yeah. Right, the messy background, or what you're wearing. Have the questions focus on their learning. Next point is to keep the responses anonymous, so students feel safe to really share with you what their concerns are. Next point is to analyze the responses. So you're going to get all this information, analyze it. And when I say analyze it, I mean sort of looking at, are there themes that are being brought up by more than one student? And those themes might suggest things that will require some change or will require some type of discussion about them. And focusing more on those than perhaps in an individual response, unless that individual response also is something that could be easily done. Next point is to summarize those responses and share them with the students. I think maybe one way you could make this not so useful is if you collect feedback from students and then don't do anything about it, because that would say, I don't really care what you have to say about it. And when it comes to summarizing those responses and share with students, there are 3 guidelines that I think are important to follow. The first one is, next point, it is to thank them, even if the responses are negative. Thank them for taking the time to share their responses with you, and then tell them what you're going to change based on their feedback. And just as importantly, tell them the kinds of things that you aren't going to change. For instance, they say, we want no more exams. Tell them why you still need to have exams in your course, but tell them why. Give them the rationale for why you're not going to make this change. And there has been some research on this that shows that instructors who collect early term feedback from their students and respond to that feedback show higher end of course ratings than instructors who don't do this. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do this for higher end of course ratings. I am suggesting that you do this because it gives you the opportunity to improve your course and respond to student feedback before the end. So it is a way to demonstrate to students you care about their learning and you want them to succeed in your course. The next slide is just one possible suggestion, and this is from a colleague of mine, Chris Gorman, who says, use this as a way to collect feedback. What should we keep, start, and stop in this class? So in other words, in terms of your student learning, what are we doing that we should keep doing? What are we not doing that we should start doing? And what are we doing that we should stop doing? And that could be a really simple way for students to provide you with feedback about your course. More complicated end of the continuum, and this is what I do for my teaching, is I have specific questions that I ask my students. So it's actually a form that they fill out anonymously. At the other end of the spectrum, instructors will just have a poll, anonymous poll, or a quiz, anonymous quiz. What aspects of this course are helping your learning? What aspects of this course are could be changed to improve your learning? So those are things to consider in collecting feedback. And there is a comment here from Kelsey. Wordless or other text frequency reporting tools are a great way to summarize and share response feedbacks from students. Even things like upvoting, downvoting, etc.
Whiteboards in Canvas. So, you could have folks type some words or some comments or use emojis in those too. There's some creative ways to do it too. If you find that you have survey fatigue, not that any of us have that, but.
Yeah. So I'm going to move into the summary. And what we talked about today were ways to provide effective feedback in a way to help your students maintain motivation in your online course. So think of these as continual tools to pull out of your toolbox throughout your course to help maintain student motivation. Provide students with multiple forms of feedback and provide students with feedback on different aspects of your course. And we also encourage you to ask students for feedback on their learning in terms of like classroom assessment techniques or other forms. This could include self-assessments on their learning, and ask students for feedback on the course and on your teaching.
One other thing I would add really quick at the end is if this is all feeling a little bit overwhelming at this point, obviously we're not asking you to do every single one of these things, but these are some strategies to think about. And forgive my cat over here, but as with everything, you know, when you're teaching a course, it's always sort of a little experimental, and it's always like you're revising a draft. I like to think of teaching a course as you're writing a draft. You never get to a final draft necessarily. There are always things that you're tweaking. So be thinking about some of these strategies for tweaking the ways that you're getting feedback. You don't have to do all of them, but think about 1 or 2 tweaks you might make in how you get feedback. So collective deep breath. You don't have to do all the things, just a couple of the things.
Excellent point, Claire. And keep in mind, we at the Center for Educational Innovation are available for support. Just send us an email, ask for a consultation, you can send me an email if you just want to chat about this or anything related to your teaching.
We do have one more thing we want to ask of you before you vacate, though. Ready?
And it is a form of feedback.
It is, yeah.
So what we would like you to do before you leave is to provide a 1-sentence summary on your key takeaway from this session. And if it's too challenging to come up with a 1-sentence summary, you could also ask, what is one question you still have? And put this question in the chat. Now, this is going to serve a couple of purposes. One, it provides us feedback on what you took away from the session. The other is that in asking you to do a 1-sentence summary, we are doing a reflective activity for you. We are asking you to reflect on what you've learned and to summarize that in a way that we hope makes this learning stick with you going forward.
So just take the last minute or so to go ahead and do that.
Yep.
Thank you.
And we have one more slide at the end just with, while you're doing this, just to prepare you, where we'll ask you for some feedback on this session. And again, if you have questions, put them in here. And when we provide you with this follow-up with the recording, if you still have questions that weren't answered, we can address those in our follow-up. And then maybe while people are still filling that in, go to the last slide, where we thank you so much for participating. We know you have many things going on right now with your work, your teaching, and in life. So please accept our gratitude for spending an hour with us today here. If you click on the link or type in the Z link, z.umn.edu/motivating, it is a very brief survey. We would appreciate that you could fill out for us with feedback on this particular workshop. And that will help us provide guidance for improving our workshops going forward. So thank you so much for your participation.
We welcome your feedback.
Yes.
Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.
Yeah.